Hello, everyone. We are now beginning our unit on language, nation, and power. And what we will be exploring throughout this unit is the idea that language, like many of the cultural practices we have explored, is not neutral. Language is a constructed system of meaning that is ranked and stratified. Much of this is because of the ways in which language is reflective of this thing called nation. So to transition into the third unit, we're going to explore the links between language and nation formation. And in this lecture, I'm going to introduce you to a theory that will help you conceptualize what it means to be a nation, how national consciousness is formed, and the role language plays in this process. And this theory is called imagined communities. Over the past week, we've been examining media industries within the context of culture of capitalism. We examined how capitalism, an economic system built on private ownership of the means of production, becomes culturally embedded. And when we place this process in the context circles, we discussed how culture becomes commodified and mass-produced to the benefit of the wealthy elite. And through an examination of media as a for-profit industry, we were able to dig deeper into this idea that the commodification of culture is a hegemonic process. However, we also explored how audiences are able to critically engage and even produce their own meaning to contest top-down meanings of their bodies, their cultural practices, and their positionality. And we focused on media as a way to explore where the categories of the addressing model are learned, how they become internalized, and how we, in turn, can reproduce those systems in our daily lives. And that is because media, in this sense, has a powerful influence on shaping our understanding of nation. For a quick review, we talked about nation states before when we discussed global migration. We talked about immigration policy and how that requires a concept of a nation state. That is, a country with a sovereign centralized government, laws and a constitution, borders, and some concept of citizenship. Having these elements allows us to say who belongs and under what conditions someone belongs. So you can say a citizen looks like this, believes these things, he lives within these boundaries, and is bound by the government's laws. And anyone else is not from here. In other words, in order to define outsider, you need to define insider. Nation states are how we do that. And nation states are a bit different from nations. In academia, nation typically refers to a group of people who share a cultural heritage. Nation state refers to the idea that a nation has a formal, independent form of governance that is somehow also kind of identified with that kind of construction of nation. So each nation then has one state. And while they are different terms, it really is impossible to discuss nation without understanding the role of the state. First of all, no culture is uniform, so there's no such thing as a nation in which everyone is culturally the same. But second, governance plays an important role in how we are differently positioned from one another. So any discussion of nation really needs to look at nation in conjunction with the state. However, since culture is not uniform, a true nation state where each state has one homogeneous nation is never fully realized. Part of this is because of structural oppression. When people are differently positioned within a society, their concept of nation is going to be very different from each other. And while some might celebrate a national identity and a sense of national pride, some call national identity into question. One example is from a speech that Frederick Douglass gave. You learned about Frederick Douglass during the lecture on social constructs. And he gave the speech on the 4th of July. And he said, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is constant victim, To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty, an unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. With all your religious parade and solemnity are, to him, mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of the United States at this very hour. In this passage, he's articulating the politics of belonging in these words, that nation states are formed for a few at the expense of others. He was articulating how the United States was formed on the backs of Black, brown, and Native bodies, and how those same people continue to be exploited as their white supposed allies celebrate the country's supposed greatness. What Frederick Douglass and others like him recognize is the relationships between the nation-state, nationalism, and power. Scholars and activists throughout history have pointed to how national identities can be so strong and so normalized, and that they can really take hold in ways that we don't even always realize. And they can also be used to advance imperialist projects. And what the theory of imagined communities helps us to understand is how this happens, but also how nations themselves are constructed. Before we get into that theory, however, I think a little reflection exercise will help you to think through what nation and national identity means to you, which will hopefully help you better understand the theory of imagined communities. So before moving on to the next lecture video, I would like you to complete exercise 5.1.